On this episode, I'm speaking to Sivan Aldor-Noiman, who is the VP of Data Science at Wellio. She has a fantastic background. We're going to cover a lot of different topics. I think mainly we're going to be talking about what she's doing at Wellio, her transition from academia to industry, and then talking about the emergence and hopefully growth of females in data science and why it might be a ideal field to kind of grow the whole notion of bringing more diversity into the industry. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, sure. Excited.
Awesome. So I gave a 8-second blurb of your background as the VP of Wellio. That doesn't do you justice whatsoever. Can you start off maybe just doing an introduction of who you are and kind of what you're doing at Wellio?
Sure. So the prolonged elevator pitch, I call it.
Prolonged elevator pitch.
Yeah. I'm Israeli, and that's why the weird name. And I left Israel when I was 26 to pursue the PhD program in statistics at Wharton. I finished that and transitioned into industry. I started as an individual contributor, kind of a data scientist was the rebranding of statistician at that moment. And so I developed models and I helped figure out how to help people make decisions in ag, which was a really interesting challenge. But over the time, the company grew and got actually purchased and grew even more. We started with 15 people in data science. We grew it to like 80-something people. So it was a big growth for that group. And so I got opportunities to become a manager. I learned that I actually like to manage people and lead people. And so over the course of time in climate, if you look at my resume, you see me sort of having endless titles. Just because every time I grew a team to a certain size, I was like, okay, now they are fine. They know what they're doing. I want something else. I want some new space. I'm a statistician, so every time you give me new data, I get excited. So I really wanted to explore. And so I really, in climate, got a lot of opportunities to start new teams, to take on over existing teams. It was really exciting in that sense. And I traveled fields of environment and weather prediction to remote sensing and large experimental design for ag. So it was really all over the space of agriculture and environment, which was awesome. Well, in these periods of time, I also have 2 kids. So throughout career and academia, I somehow managed to get 2 boys into my life, which was great. But after sort of growing the team to a big size in climate, I decided I really want to go back to technical work, hands-on, actually train myself as a data engineer, which wasn't really what I was doing at all. So I moved to Wellio, which was literally 4 people with me in the count. So it's 4 people, not in a garage, but not very far away from that definition. I became a data engineer, data scientist, basically. I had to learn DevOps. I had to learn data engineering. I had to get my models into production. I had to figure out all these things, which was great. It was just technically pushing me into great directions. But I've been there 3.5 years. So over the 3.5 years now, I have a team of, I think, 16 or 17 people on what we call the platform side. And that group has data scientists, data engineers, machine learning engineers, data ops. And what they're in charge of is building kind of the infrastructure for the platform. And the platform vision, at least, is to try to create an artificial chef and nutritionist so that it will be available for everyone in the world. Because as we know, some people have maybe access to a nutritionist. Some very few people have access to the chef. But to marry those two together where you can actually figure out what's healthy for me and tasty for me, or, not just eat cucumber all day long, but actually here's how you can balance your meals in a way that's good and delightful for you. That's sort of what we want from this platform to be able to do. So that's what the team is working on. It's recommendation systems, it's data pipelines, it's models, data augmentation models, things like that. So it's really exciting in that sense.
Wow, that's really interesting because my mind just was thinking futuristic. How cool would it be is if the refrigerator itself using computer vision can tell you what's in there so that it kicks out the optimum recipe for what I have. Because my biggest challenge is when you open the refrigerator and you're like, what am I going to cook? It's like, okay, well, this has been here for a couple of days. I can use this, I can use that. oh, I got to go to the store now and pick up one item. And you're like, I'm not going to make it. My wife's like, all right, well, what else can we do? So that would be a really cool thing to see incorporated. Not that I know what you're doing with the product.
No, totally fine. I actually, a little bit before the pandemic started, my team created a product that basically does that. Basically, if you have things in your pantry and you list them out, it could start making recommendations of what recipes you could make. Some of them you don't have to go to the shop anymore. Like it's a pantry. We call them pantry recipes. I don't want to, it's a shameless plug, but it's called fridgetotable.com or mealhere.com. Either way, it will lead you there. And yeah, it was basically with that idea in mind, which a lot of people start cooking with what they have. They don't really start by, oh, what do I don't have? Let me first figure out what I don't have and then let's cook. And certainly this pandemic has caused kind of consumer behaviors even change more radically into that direction of like, hey, I'm gonna have to get by for a week or two with what I have. So let's figure out the meals that I want to do. And so that's sort of the team has been working really well on this project of like, yeah, how do we support people who are, who need to cook with what they have and not necessarily go shopping every day to their, if before we heard consumers say, if I'm missing something, I'll just, go to the store around the corner and grab it. Now we're hearing people like, oh, I plan out a week in advance or 2 weeks in advance and I go shopping, I sort of centralize my shopping so that I don't have to do it many times. So this used consumer behavior change has changed sort of how we approach the problem for sure.
Interesting. Yeah, and I was listening to the podcast Seth Godin had, and he mentioned how supermarkets need to change. And I'm not sure the guests he had on the podcast, but it was talking about how your local supermarket has to carry multiple of everything because they just don't know when you're going to come in. But literally, if there were smart refrigerators and people knew what they're going to be making, then we don't need 5,000 avocados to throw away 200 a day. We'll be kind of leveraging, more of a just-in-time model. But some of that's probably way far off. But what you guys are doing is really interesting because for me to not have to go one extra time to the market and figure out what I can make based on that, and it's healthy. And I think that's the biggest thing. Is my wife now is like, well, what's healthiest for us and our little one? That's the recipes out there. Not always easy to figure that out.
Yeah, I agree. And there's like definitely in the space of food, there's a lot of, diets that are kind of popular diets. They're not necessarily actually backed by science in terms of like their validity. If you kind of start asking those questions, and we've actually worked with someone who is a doctor in that space, and it's really interesting to pick his brain what's real from all these diets and all these recommendations and what's like not really validated, and the list of diets that are actually have shown to really work on health conditions, right? Not just I'm trying to lose weight, but like manage diseases like diabetes and migraines and like all sorts of that list is actually quite compact. It's not wide and broad and like for me as a scientist, it's like how do we create the right recommendation, but also based on science. Like how do we raise awareness of these things? So I think it's interesting. You mentioned the supermarkets. Definitely the supply chain in terms of data is not there. Right. You're talking about your refrigerator. So we looked at smart refrigerators actually for a little bit. I was talking to some company about that, and they showed us what the camera can see. They have like a camera, and so it is mounted in a way that it's almost impossible for a computer vision model to be able to distinguish the things that are in that fridge. Like it's really mounted at the top, so you can't really see across the refrigerator. So I think the hardware is there, but the use case of like, hey, but I actually need to use this. This is data, not to be used for recognizing what's in your fridge. That is not there yet. So this like my refrigerator first knows how to read these things, and computer vision models actually are there. I think it's not configured for them, so it's very hard to see from a round camera. That the Diet Coke is, the lettuce is behind the Diet Coke.
Yeah.
So that part is not there yet. And as you said, the supermarkets themselves, it's really interesting. Amazon in that space is trying to do what you're saying, which is really control the supply and understand exactly what's in and what's out. Definitely, there's a lot of waste in that cycle. I think from all the supermarkets, Trader Joe has done a really interesting, in their podcast about Trader Joe, because they're kind of secretive in how they do things. It's really wonderful. But they've done a really good job where they decrease the selection of things they have offering. But they're very smart. They choose things that people, they sort of embrace that behavioral aspect of humans and say, okay, you don't have 50 options for the cucumber. You only have 2. So choose between the 2. There's organic and non-organic. That's it. There's no like the long cucumber and the short cucumber and the medium cucumber and this pickle and that. And they do that. If you actually go into Trader Joe and now look at it, you'll see they really are very, very selective of what they put in front of users. And it's never more than 2 options or 3 options, because they don't want to overstock. And per square feet, I think they're the most profitable because they're doing these kind of really interesting things. So the supermarkets themselves are definitely not there in terms of data and knowing what's going on. And so it's not enough to know what the consumer wants. The supermarkets themselves are going to have to up their game in terms of their inventory management.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's super interesting to me, because I think that's where, Trader Joe's, when you go in there, the amount of square footage of space they have that's for perishable items, very small. It's a lot of like frozen and
That's
boxed
right.
and canned. Right. But when you go to any other supermarket, you have a massive section. You have maybe a quarter of the store is perishable. And you think about that and you go, all that volume of food goes to waste. And I think in the refrigerator, aside from the joke that when you turn shut the door, the lights go off anyways, which, that's a corny joke. But yeah, the optics to be able to pick up what's happening, what is specifically there to relay it to something like Wellio, to be able to say, hey, listen, this is the best thing you can make because, this is what you have in your fridge. That would be phenomenal. Who's going to do that first? I mean, I think that the technology, like you said, probably there, but I think the hardware of how the Samsungs and the LGs and GEs are willing to work with you. That I don't know if they have any. I don't know if they have any incentive or they have any real need to do it unless consumer demand kicks up.
Some of them have, like Yumily got purchased, I think, by, I can't remember, one of these companies. Whirlpool, I think. Whirlpool purchased them. And I think that's I would bet that's where their vision is going, because they're seeing that kind of opportunity. And so, Yumily is kind of a recipe discovery website, probably the most popular right now. It's really a good website in terms of the user experience. And I think, if they can master these differences, and you never know with acquisitions how things go, but if they can do it, I think it can be a nice breakthrough in that space. I think the Instacart of the world, they struggle with the fact that the supermarkets don't know what they have and they can't connect to that inventory, and that the inventory systems only get updated, I don't know, once a day at best. Even if it's twice a day, that's not sufficient in terms of actually being able to tell the consumer what you can purchase versus what you can't. So you can see all these third-party delivery, they really do struggle with this, the fact that the supermarkets and these grocery providers are not there from a technology standpoint. So everyone has to up their game. I think Amazon putting a big splash, purchasing Whole Foods, putting their own Amazon stores, they have caused a good ripple, a very good ripple in this space. So I think I'm expecting in the next several years, we're going to see a massive change in terms of digitalization of this space. It's exciting in that sense.
What's interesting is just around this topic off is I don't know how I read this and I don't know how true it is. I guess it's when the supermarkets first opened, is people would put their orders in and they would go to the store or supermarket and they would get they wouldn't go into the store and select the item. Somebody would pack it and just, here's the box. So I think like technology is coming full circle with Instacart basically doing that service for you, where here's your package. You just don't walk up to the supermarket anymore.
Yeah, and there's advantage and disadvantage, right? Some people really love to select their own things. Other people
pick and choose that strawberry.
Yeah. Or some people don't like the supermarkets; they like the farmer market, right? Yeah. So there's lots of consumer behavior that won't be fulfilled just from that. But certainly, I think technology is trained to help and sort of accommodate everyone's taste and purchase preferences. I imagine you're right. Full circle. People want to go to the farm will be delivered to them. And people who want to go to the supermarket will be delivered to them. So yeah, definitely I see changes in those kind of aspects.
Very cool. Okay, let's go. We're going to switch up gears. I know you have a very interesting background of how you got to this point. I know, you have a PhD from academia. We talked, previously about the struggles to get to industry. I mentioned I've had some messages on LinkedIn asking that very question of people going through the program. So I guess just to start off, maybe at the high level, what experience you personally had in terms of making that transition, and then maybe we'll dive into some of the maybe learning lessons we can apply to others.
Yeah. So I did like a full. I did 12 years of academia, because in Israel you actually do your master before you have to do your PhD. So I it took me 4 years to do my undergrad, and then 2 years to do my master, and then 6 years to do my PhD. 1 year because I had a baby in the middle. So because it was so easy, I decided to let's just pile it all on. So yeah, it took 12 years from the minute I decided that I want to go study something, and then all the way to and I think even in at second year in undergrad, figured out that statistics is really exciting for me. And I really, at first it was just easy for me. And then I was like, oh, actually it's interesting for me. And I took some machine learning classes, and I was like, oh, this is really interesting for me. So after finishing my master, I felt like I was not knowledgeable enough. So I was like, I can't go out in the world and say I'm a statistician. I literally took 6 classes in statistics. I'm definitely not, I personally didn't feel comfortable going into the world and saying that. So the PhD program was a good transition for me. But I realized pretty quickly that there's a few things that sort of didn't work for me. One is that I didn't see a lot of women. And it bothered me. I was, I think, for a year or two, the only female PhD student. I definitely was the only parent that for the longest time, that's for sure. Most people who were with me in the program were much younger, because by the time I started my PhD, I was 27. So I was old, definitely old. And even looking up at the professor level, I couldn't, there was one woman. For the longest time in the program, there was a single woman, and at the end there was another one. That's it. But 2 women out of a faculty of probably 20-something people, and it was sort of discouraging. And even though I saw in conferences and things like that other women, it felt to me like in biostatistics there were a lot of women, but in statistics there weren't that many. And personally, for me, the exciting part of statistics was applying it. It wasn't so much like the theory, developing theories. It was, developing a theory and applying it to some real world problem. So I knew I'm passionate about that. So there was these things that were, very apparent to me. And then I also, I knew I had a desire to learn how to lead. Like I knew I wanted to sort of explore that leadership opportunities. I was in the military when I was younger, and that exposed me to some of these things. And I was like, I think I'm actually good at it, and I want to try it out. And I felt that in academia, it's not really something that people do. I mean, yes, you can become the head of the department, but typically that's a seniority thing. It's not really based on your qualification as like, you've shown that you can lead people. And I love teaching, but I really didn't like writing papers. I was like, I developed my methodology. I applied it. I was like, good, well done. And then I had to write this paper, and I was like, I'm really not good at writing papers. I really don't enjoy that process. I really don't like the scrutiny of 3 people who are anonymous looking at your paper but dissecting it to pieces, and I just felt that process is not for me. This anonymity didn't work for me. I was like, I want people who criticize me to stand in front of me and criticize me so that we can have a conversation. So like the whole premise of academia didn't felt right to me. So I think it was the fourth year where I was like, okay, this is not for me, and I will not stay in academia. If I want to teach because I love teaching, I'll find opportunities outside. So it was like I knew I didn't want to stay in academia. So that's the first thing. I kind of realized it really quickly. And then started the journey of finding what I wanted to do. And I, at the time data science started, it was 2012. And I started applying to like, Twitter and Google and Facebook and small company, I went to, I didn't know what I wanted. So I was like, okay, cast a big net anywhere. Some I got rejected. I did a whole interview process with LinkedIn. And at the end they were like, oh, you're not exactly what we're looking for. And I was like, okay, great. That's fine. But I got accepted. I can remember flying from the East Coast to the West Coast for a whole week of interviews. Basically, I jumped from one company to another. I did actually a Google interview, and I interviewed for a company, Green Plum and Climate Corporation. And it was a day after day. I just sort of stacked them. It was because that made sense to me. And I came out of that week really inspired. I was like, some of these companies are working on really cool problems, but some of these companies ask me really weird questions. That's the other thing. I can't tell you like how many times in phone screens and in on-site interviews, people ask me what a p-value is. And I kept asking myself, why are they asking this? And weird things like, explain to me technically what a p-value is, and then explain to me in a non-technical way what a p-value is. And I was like, why are we talking about this? I have a PhD in statistics. I know what a p-value is. So I sort of, every time a company asked me about that, I sort of, after that said, I'm not joining this company. Like, I don't care who they are. It doesn't matter. The fact that they're asking me this either means that I'm going to have to explain really simple concept to people, which that's not why I'm leaving academia. Like I want to take all my skills and apply it to something cool and useful in the world and good. So I'm not going to just calculate p-values all day long and then like explain why an experiment is successful or not. That felt very weird. That was a disqualifying criteria.
Interesting. I'm curious. So I guess, you've gone through the PhD program, and you've gone through the interviews. When you were talking about the anonymity of people dissecting your papers and documents, what was the thought when people were asking you p-value? Was it the flip opposite of, my God, I'm going to go talk to people that are just, I'm not going to be able to communicate with? Is that really was the biggest concern? No,
I thought, I can communicate really well with these people, but I thought, it feels like I'm going back to teaching Stat 101.
Okay.
I didn't mind the questions, but I was like, if this is a glimpse, and this is something that I'm really careful, even like this is an experience that sort of haunts me today when I interview. Because I think, it's a two-way street in interviews. So, you get to a little glimpse into what that company wants from you, from the set of questions that they're asking you. And for me, I interpret those questions as she needs to be able to explain technical concept to non-technical people, which is fine. But I didn't appreciate that they took, things that are very simple. It's not like, hey, explain to someone in the business world why using a Boltzmann machine is the right thing for this problem. It was, explain a very rudimentary and basic concept in statistics to the people in front of you. And to me, that meant, okay, so all day long, I will be taking really simple concept in statistics and explaining it to everyone around me. And I was like, that's what I did in Stat 101 with people who have no knowledge in statistics, and I had to explain that to them. But I don't want to do that in my job day to day. I want to work with people around me who understand my language, but also push me to learn new things. So if my role is always to translate, then I'm never going to learn new things. I'm never going to take, I was specializing in temporal spatial modeling, and I was like, really advanced concept in Bayesian machine learning. And I was like, didn't feel from these interviews a p-value. I was like, so you're not going to let me do Bayesian machine learning. You're going to ask me for p-values. And I don't want to do that. You can hire someone who is straight out of undergrad to answer these questions, and it doesn't require a PhD. And it felt to me like you're hiring me because I have a PhD, but you're actually going to ask me to do tasks that people with a lot less education can do, and probably that's more reasonable to hire them for this kind of position. So it's a mirror, right? It's like you get to see what the company wants from you. And today, when I do interviews myself, I really make it a point to talk about what projects people are going to work on, because you may in a technical interview be asked simple questions, but it's really important to also explain to the candidate what is exciting, what's new, what are they going to work on that's going to push them in terms of skill development. And I think these companies who asked me about p-values, they really didn't do a good job of that. And I left thinking, I don't care what name you have in the industry. I didn't study 12 years of statistics to go to be a Stat 101 teacher in your org.
Do you think, like, when you look back at it in academia, you went through research papers, was there, in terms of the preparation of going into these rounds of interviews, I mean, this is thinking back a few years now, did you feel prepared, or was it a trial by fire, or was there enough in your program of, hey, when you guys are leaving academia to interview for the first job, this is what you're to expect?
No, there was zero. And I would be surprised and shocked if the statistics department have raised the bar on that particular side. I don't think, if you ask professors in these programs, they view it as their goal to bring more students into the academia world. I think in that sense, I'm a disappointment, because, any one of us who sort of left academia is not fulfilling their role. So no, I don't think they train. In fact, I think statistics department really do a crappy job, because statisticians are trained in the math, but they're not trained, for example, in computer science and coding. And we do a lot of it. And so you either pick it up yourself or you don't. And in that sense, when you go into the outside world, you're pretty unprepared. No, they did not prepare us for any of this. There were lots of people who finished the program and graduated, and there was no attempt to sort of connect the students with these graduate students who were, really all over the space. There were some in finance, there were some in Google. I know some people were at Facebook and Apple, and there are lots of people. The network was pretty extensive outside academia, but there was no attempt from the department to try to connect and assist people in finding jobs that are going to be interesting, insightful for them. There was no attempt to prepare us for interviews. There was no guidance on that at all. I remember I practiced with my office mate, who's also not in academia now, and I just practiced with him. I would say, okay, we're going to interview with this company, and I would learn as much as I could about the company. But at Google, for example, you can't really learn a lot. I mean, it's a giant, so you can't really learn everything. The interview process at that time, and I think it still is, it's very general. Like, lots of groups interview you, so you can't actually prepare for all of them. So I asked him to sit down with me and said, okay, ask me a bunch of questions, statistics, what do you think they're going to ask me? I talked to some of the graduate people who were working for those companies. I did ask them for help, tell me what the interview process was like and what should I expect. I think now there's a little bit more support. I know I am part of a Slack channel for women in data science and machine learning, and there are students in there, and they ask, can someone help me prepare? Do you know the type of questions they ask? I really didn't know. I didn't know it's going to be coding. Is it going to be am I going to, write R code? Am I going to do algorithms? I had no idea at the first interview. It was a complete mystery. The second time I already kind of knew, so I had help from other people and asked them to ask me about one of my interviews asked me to to explain how Jacobin is being computed. And I was like, why are we, how is this related to anything? But yeah, that was the Climate Corporation interview, and it actually went really, interesting and fun. But it's all over the space. People ask you math questions, and then they're like, "Oh well, here's a real data. How would you solve a problem we haven't solved in 3 years?" And I'm like, "Okay, let's talk about the problem you haven't solved in 3 years."
So it sounds. I mean, yeah, that's kind of interesting. That I guess it makes sense if you're in academia and the thought is you're going to go into teaching and research, then there's really no.
Oh yeah,
reason.
there's lots of preparation for that.
Yeah, that's the bread and butter. This is what we want you to do.
I know how to cover that one.
Yeah, if you're leaving, so I guess if you're a person right now, you're completing your PhD and you already know you're leaving. Let's say 18 months, 2 years, you're finishing. What would you? I guess if you were to go hindsight, what are the one or two things that you like? Okay, I have 2 years left, 18 months left. I need to do X, Y, and Z because I know now in hindsight that would have helped.
It depends really what you're doing in academia, but I would say taking some classes in machine learning and statistics, machine, depending on what sort of interests you more, but taking some classes in that, and also kind of hands-on, if you can do a project with an external company. Sometimes there's these kind of projects. I think that those are really good exposure to real data that you really have to do it. I would also say try participating in Kaggle, because those are real problems, and you also get to see how other people solve it that are outside your immediate perimeter. So just enter one of these competitions, not even for winning, just for trying it out, training a model that it's not pretty, and it's no one's guiding you how to do it. You really have to kind of figure it out yourself. Because I think academia is very structured at the end of the day, right? So the problems are very, just do this. The problem is, I think in the business world, no one tells you what to do. No one even, sometimes when you get to a certain level, no one even tells you what to solve. So as you grow in your career, you need to learn how to do that. You need to learn how to dissect the business goal to the business problem, to the business solution, to the technical solution. And I do get a lot of resumes where people say, I entered the Kaggle competition, I tried it, and I think that's impressive when people do that, because it's, this shows that they actually have tried something real. I think resumes today, they need a little bit of real world experience. It's not sufficient to sort of say, I've taken a Coursera class in machine learning, because almost everyone in this space now has that on their resume. So it's not very impressive and not a differentiator anymore. So I'd say, take classes, so get trained a little bit. You have an opportunity, so get trained in it. Try it out in a space where there's no control. So Kaggle would be great. And then the other thing is, I think, the kind of the business aspect, and I think that sort of differentiates really good data scientists and machine learners, is they can really translate the business. And that skill set, I think academia really has not nailed how to train people to do that, like critical thinking, things like that. But I wish I took some classes in management when I was undergrad, and I really didn't enjoy it. I remember I was like, I want math, I don't want this. I think if I had to redo it, I would take some classes in sort of business understanding, right? Like a little bit of finance, a tiny bit of management, psychology, things like that. That's sort of like the softer skills, I would say. But if you have them, you understand the business better, and then you can offer solutions that are better from a technical perspective. So those are probably what I would redo if I could.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I think I had a guest on for previous podcast recording, and he mentioned that data scientists moving into the business, solving the business problems, are going to be a bigger and bigger portion of the day, because a lot of the models are already being developed. What else is net new that hasn't been discovered for average size companies? I don't know. I don't do the job, so you would be able to maybe talk about that. But from the business side of it, coming from academia, what was the ramp? Because you just mentioned, obviously in undergrad, you had some courses, but what was the ramp to actually be able to then conceptually apply it and understand, okay, well, my theory and my understanding of the technology is one thing, but solving their problem for profit is a whole different thing.
Yeah, it's true. It does change the ball quite significantly, because academia, you do the exercise for the sake of like developing a new method. It's sort of it's like a mind challenge. It's not necessarily every time you have like a real world problem where it's, changing people's lives or money or anything like that. It's just, sometimes it's just the exercise for the sake of the exercise. So I think, when I started in the Climate Corporation, I think probably the first 6 months I truly didn't understand the business problem. I kind of relied heavily on my lead to tell me, to basically just, say like, Sivan, you need to develop a model to predict, it was in the context of, they were then doing insurance. So it was sort of to create the structure of the insurance policy, basically, the numbers in those policies. And he's like, we have a model A, we need you to develop a better version of it. Here's the constraints, here's the data that we have, here's what would make it better. This is the definition of better. Can you help us? And I really relied totally on him to explain it to me, because that's how you start. I think when you really start, you don't know. So someone more senior than you, that's their job, to translate business to a language that you can grasp and get. And I was sort of the first statistician on the team that wasn't converted into an engineer. Like they had two more statisticians, but they were both sort of, okay, and, write data pipelines. And I was the first one that I think they gave up pretty much after a week. They're like, Sivan can't do it, so let's utilize her in a different way. So I was tasked with write models. So I think, for the first 6 months, really relied heavily on my lead. And then I think at some point I started to realize that it's all translation, right? Like someone else is translating. There's subjectivity a little bit about all this process of what's the business problem, what's the most important thing, how to prioritize solutions, how to prioritize problems. It's a little subjective. I mean, there's data, but there's also subjectivity. So I started asking why, basically. I started asking, so why am I working on this? And why is this the best thing to be working on? What other things can we be working on? And because I was asking why, then answers about the business had to come in, right? Because the business, when you ask, why is this the most important project that I am working on right now? Then your manager is sort of forced to think through a reasonable answer and forced to like really, and I think data scientists, it has to be logical. It can't be like because. The because is not an acceptable answer. You're going to have to prove it through data. You're going to have to prove it through some prior, but something has to reason through why. And so, it started asking lots of whys. And at a certain point, when I became a manager, I had to answer the whys. And that is a really harsh transition. When you transition to become a manager, you carry this burden of why. And that burden, for me, I take it very seriously, which means I have to really think through why I believe this is the most important thing. Why is this business problem? How is this solution going to help the business become better, more profitable? And so that skill set, I think I only developed really in like after several years of being a manager, because you have to sort of be challenged by the people around you, whether they're above you, below you, to the sides. All of the people are asking you, basically explain to me, why is this more important? Why, above you asks, why is this the right thing for us? And the below you asks, why am I working on this? And the sides to you ask, well, how does it help me? So you have to be able to articulate, but it is not a skill set that I had off the bat. It's just a curiosity I had. And so I took this curiosity and started saying, okay, I need to now learn the business a lot better to be able to answer these questions. And so that's what I did. I spent, I think two-thirds of my career in climate, really trying to understand the business, the consumer side. How are they using our products? How is the data product enabling them? And Wellio is no different. The only difference is because I joined really early, I was part of the decision-making process really
You're part of the
on.
why.
Yeah.
That would help. That'd be a massive difference. I guess that's if you're making that transition, joining a startup versus joining an established company, that might be a big trial by fire of not having that lead to explain to you why you're going to be dropped in. And imagine if that was your first job versus having a climate, having some structure above you, you'd have had a definitely different experience.
Yeah, and people ask me. I have people who ping me and ask, is it better to take a startup job, a small startup job, or like a bigger company, let's say 100 people? And I actually think for someone who's just sort of starting their career, there's advantages and disadvantages in both of them. The advantages in a bigger company is you're going to have lots of people to learn from, and like they're going to push you. You're in that like zero, so you're going to learn like insanity the first 2 years if you're in the right group, and they'll push you, and you'll learn new methodologies and new technologies, and it's going to be like an extended honeymoon period, which is what I had in climate. I think in the beginning, it was really that feeling. The advantage of going to a tiny startup is they're probably going to ask you to do things that no normal company is going to ask you to do. Like, I had someone I know who joined a very tiny company. He was the only data scientist, and he, developed ResNet for them for like he ran these crazy models for them, and he didn't do. I don't think he knew what he was doing all the way, but it was like a crazy playground, right? Like he had the resources from a money perspective. He could run whatever he wants. He could train whatever he wanted. So he got to try out things. But I think he after a year in that kind of environment, he actually transitioned to a much bigger company. I think acknowledging that, yeah, it's fun. It's fun to, be in a place where it's like I can do whatever I want. But it's not very developing for the career because you don't have any mentors. If you want to develop soft skills, that a tiny company is probably not the right place for that. Even if you want to develop technical skills, most people around you don't understand what you're doing. So they're not gonna tell you what to do, and they're not going to tell you how to do it. They're just expect you to somehow miraculously figure this all out. And they're
not even going to know. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's, I guess it does depend the type of person you are. Because if you're a person that loves to deal in that kind of ambiguity, and you have the desire to want to sink or swim, and that's a different environment. Obviously it's structure and learning, you'll get exposed to less different. So I think it's all different. I think the one thing what I'm listening to is it's a different experience. The learning from others is one aspect, because you're going to add a lot of tools to your toolbox, and then being asked to do something no one knows how to do, you're going to figure out a lot of stuff on your own, which could go both ways. You mentioned, I guess, earlier in talking about academia, you mentioned, and I think you mentioned, being a Slack channel women in data science and ML. And I know previously when we were talking about it, you'd mentioned how the field might be relevant to females because of the type of work versus pure software engineering. I just want to get some of your thoughts. I know we're going to wrap up soon, but I didn't want to leave without touching on this.
Yeah, thank you. It's a topic I'm passionate about for sure. So I think, statistics has been in business for a very long time. But I think data science has not, as kind of like a core capability for a business. That's only been around for the last kind of decade, to be honest. So it's a relatively new space for most businesses, and it hasn't really sort of formed its identity clearly in businesses. You see some businesses that like thinking is analytics part of data science, is machine learning a data science. The nomenclatures are not yet set. You'll see all sorts of weird differences in like the definitions, like what's a senior data scientist? Is that the same as a machine learner researcher? Is it engineer? Is it data engineer? Is that like a machine learning engineer now? Like, so all these things are not formed. And they're not consistent, let's say, across organizations for sure. Some organizations don't even have a clear career path for data scientists and machine learners. They're struggling to sort of, understand how to develop people and how to, what does that mean? How does that compare to a software engineer? How does that compare to other parallel jobs? So it's not set in stones. And I think there's something because of that. It invites people from all sorts of backgrounds, like electrical, like if you're going into, I don't know, hardware, you're going to be a hardware engineer, then you most likely have to have that background in academia. Like it's just, you don't land, live your life and like, yes, hardware engineer, I'll just land this job that has like a crazy description and I don't know what that means. In data science, it actually, I have people with backgrounds all over the space, like, people who have undergrad in biology, and then people who are transitioning they've been in the private sector in sales, and now they're transitioning into data analytics. And we've got engineers who want to move into the machine learning engineering space. And like, it really doesn't have just like it doesn't have a clear career path, it doesn't have a clear path into it. And that to me means that it's open field. Everyone can join. Everyone can probably sort of find themselves in, everyone with a reasonable background, right? Not everyone in the world, but everyone with a reasonable background can probably try it and see how it works. And so that first is a good spot, right? That means that the diversity, that anyone can try. That's good. The other thing is, I think we're in a interesting period of time where people are acknowledging that these machine learning and data science products carry not just the burden of a normal, product, but also there's an ethical part to it. There is consequences for unleashing these types of models into the wild. They're kind of like considerations that I think 10 years ago, no one would have raised an eyebrow about. And I think I've noticed that women tend to think about these implications more, like their natural inclinations to think about these things. So I think they provide a really good sounding board in these moments. Like if you're creating a recommendation system for health or for a farmer or anything like that, there's implications, right? I'm not talking about even actually in search and things like that, there's implications, right? Because we can sort of sway public opinions by, Netflix and Facebook and all of these. We clearly have like the public attention. But I'm even talking about higher risk data products where, the decision that the data product is supposed to make or help with concerns your livelihood, concerns your health, it's a big deal if it gets it wrong. And I think you need diversity. You need diversity in the thinking of how to design these things, because you need to think through the data and you need to think through the models and you need to think through the implications. And so it's not just women. In general, I think to design these data products in a thoughtful manner, you have to have opposite opinions in the room. You can't just have someone saying, yes, let's go for this model. And so women are invited. I also think minorities are invited. And these companies with higher risk, those companies should even invest more in diversity, because they got to listen to all the sides. It is not as simple of just like unleashing a model into the world. That's super irresponsible in my mind. And if you have these people in the room, when you make these models, they will highlight the problems. They will catch it before it's sort of out in the wild. So I really believe in diversity in this space. And that's part of joining Wellio, by the way, because I could start a company with a certain culture where diversity is encouraged, and directness is encouraged. And for data science to actually thrive in a company, it has to be open-minded. It can't, and diversity makes you open-minded.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think the one thing, you're inside it. I was going to ask your opinion. Is I think there's going to be different roles that are going to be fleshed out. I think right now lots of people wear multiple hats because it's still young, and I mean when you look at software engineering, roles get broken out over time. Now it's going back to being a different way, but somebody who's going to come in and play the data ethics part, the governance part. Obviously bigger companies have all those departments and those roles. Smaller companies will start having to think, okay, well, I don't need to have a PhD from, statistics to come do this particular role. Can I find somebody who can play the data ethics, the data governance, that can learn it, that's not as maybe technical? And that's going to invite, I think, a lot more, like you said, diversity into the field.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's a group in NYU that's really focused on ethics and data. I can't remember their name right now, but their backgrounds is really just across the board, like, ethics professors and sociologists and psychologists. And a lot of them don't really have technical background in machine learning or anything like that. But the papers they write and the sort of things they advocate for is how does this impact humanity? And that doesn't require you to deeply understand how to deploy this model. It challenges you, like you're saying, more so to think through if this is the data product, who will be impacted by it? What decisions should it support? What decisions should it not? Where is it wrong? Where is it right? And how do we handle those use cases? And that's a conversation not just between, I think, data scientists and, kind of the data governance, but also the UI, the designers, the rest of the org. So I agree with you. I think we're young. We're still in the stupid stage. But I'm hoping, I'm confident, I think, that we'll grow out of it, of the stupid stage.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm curious. Do you think one day? I mean, obviously, you read all about AI and machine learning, like you mentioned, bias. Do you envision needing some kind of steering committee before a particular app can be launched to, have steps? Because I guess the biggest fear is, like you mentioned, somebody could come up with an app, release it, and do we know the impact? Do we know bias? Do we know the implications? Will there need to be, maybe there are specific steps and steering committees that will look at something, evaluate it, criteria, go, maybe there's a statistical model that evaluates those criteria to see if there's bias being included.
I think, the tools are developing in that direction. We've got more awareness, so there's more infrastructure being developed in that space of monitoring and testing out, and that I already see movement in that direction of tooling. I know in Wellio we are starting to put infrastructure around knowing all our models, figuring out how they're doing in the wild. So there's lots of companies who invested a lot in infrastructure of getting that. So technically, the answer is we're getting there, but I think, like you're saying, just to evaluate a model based on their accuracy, it's not going to tell you the blind spots. You're still blind in the areas we don't know. I think it's going to be more regulated. Generally, data is going to be much more regulated because right now people sort of freely give it, but it's clearly something they own, the data that they generate. And a lot of companies are making money off of that data. So I believe that we will see more government regulation policy around data management. And we're already seeing some ideas in there, but it's not nearly how much it should be, to be honest. And because it's going to be more regulated, the models will themselves have to be more governed for sure. I don't know if there's a steering committee. That's the step that's a bigger step, I think, in my mind. But if the toolings are there, there may be more rigorous QA processes that develop to ensure that the models don't start producing things that can cause harm, I guess. That's the biggest concern. Where they don't cause harm, when the Google search brings a search result that's not so awesome, you type again the query, it's okay. When the machine learning algorithm tells you you're not sick and you are sick, that's a big deal, I think.
Well, those are I guess the evolution of technology. It's got to start out somewhere and stumble, crawl, and you end up with more advanced systems over time. And it's really exciting. I mean, I appreciate your time. I cognizant of your time. I could probably keep talking to you for the rest of the day, but I know you have other things to get to. But I do appreciate your time talking today. And then if someone does want to reach out, what are some of the good avenues to contact you?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, LinkedIn. So I've got Sivan. I mean, there are not a lot of Sivan Aldor-Noiman in the world.
Yeah.
So
we'll post that too. So
LinkedIn is a good place. I'm very active on the Women in Machine Learning and Data Science Slack channel. So if you Google that, you will find a way to sort of join the Slack, and you're so welcome to do that. And I always seek for opportunities to mentor people. I believe in it as sort of a way to help the next generation, or even people who are in my generation and are just trying to make decisions and they need sounding board. So I encourage that. Feel free to LinkedIn me, chat with me. I never, unless you're a very annoying recruiter, I will get back to you. I guarantee that.
Awesome. So definitely appreciate your time today. And anyone who's listening to the podcast, please reach out to Sivan if you have questions. As she mentioned, she's very active. And also leave us a review for this podcast episode. The more reviews we get, more people see it, the more people we can hopefully help mentor and help them level up. So thank you today.
Thank you.